Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me. So just before we head into the interview here, I will take a moment to explain how it's going to work. I do have some scripted questions to go through with our guest, and once we get to the end, I will verbally introduce when it's time for viewer questions. So without further ado, hello everyone, my name is Mark Allard-Will, and I will be your host today. But as you can see, I am not alone. I am joined by the prolific comic book artist Brian Bolland. Brian, for viewers who may be unfamiliar with your work, could I ask you to introduce both yourself and your work, please?
Yeah, my name is Brian Bolland, and well done for pronouncing it correctly. Most Americans and Canadians, I assume, don't quite know how to pronounce the first vowel in my surname. But yes, I've been a comic artist since 1975. I started on a thing called Power Man, which was published. Well, it was published here, but it was distributed in Nigeria. Soon after that, in '77, I started on 2000 AD, and I was drawing Judge Dredd. I was drawing covers to begin with on 2000 AD, and then I moved into doing interior Judge Dredd stories. I grew up on DC Comics, the American comics, as a kid, and eventually I ended up working for DC Comics, doing a thing called Camelot 3000. In '86, I think it was, I did The Killing Joke, which was a Batman and the Joker. Pretty much after that, I've done short strips here and there, but a lot of covers for all sorts of people. That's a starter, really.
Wonderful, thank you. So as a comic book artist in 2020, what do you prefer? Do you prefer the traditional mediums or digital, and why?
Well, I went digital in 1997, I think it was, and I've been digital ever since. Everything since then that I've done for publication has been done in Photoshop. I mean, people think it's computer generated, which I think is a misleading term, because it sounds as if you press a button and the computer does it for you. I'm drawing on a Wacom tablet with a pen, so every line you see has been drawn, but it's on a screen and there is no artwork. So I'm entirely digital, really. People try to talk me into doing sketches for them, but I'm so unused to working with pens. Or I used to draw with a brush and ink, and I've totally lost the skill to do that. And my sketches would be so substantially, as they now tend to turn up on the internet, or but I just don't do them at all. So I'm fully digital.
Thank you. That's very interesting because I hear such a mix from artists that there's some that are very strict to sticking with traditional medium and comic board, and some that are
Yeah,
very...
some people have tried it. Yeah, some people have tried it and they just don't get on with it, and they go back to traditional. I mean, there is one disadvantage, great disadvantage, and that is there is no artwork. If you're working on paper, you do end up with a wonderful piece of art that is good to look at, and people buy it off you and like to collect it. But I don't have any, and I haven't had any. How long is that? Is that that's 23 years, really, isn't it? I haven't produced any artwork.
You were one of the many...
No, it's 30. Hang on, isn't that 30? So if oh no, 97. I stopped drawing on paper in 97, so that is 23 years, isn't it? Correct me if I'm wrong. My arithmetic is terrible.
Oh yeah, that will be 23. Yeah.
Yeah.
My understanding is that you were one of the many British writers and artists in the comic industry to become a figure in what became known as the British invasion of American comics. For viewers who are perhaps newer to comics, what was the British invasion? How did it begin? And how did you become a figure in that?
Well, for me, it began when, there was a fellow working at 2008. And not the actor, another Richard Burton, and he was very big in the early fanzines, and he knew people at DC Comics, in particular, he knew Paul Levitz, and The artist who was drawing Green Lantern at the time, Joe Staton, was in London at a convention, and Paul had asked Richard Burton if he knew anywhere where he could go where there was a drawing table where he could carry on drawing Green Lantern while he was in London. And they thought of me. So Joe Staton came and worked on our spare drawing table. And I told him I was a big Green Lantern fan and I would love to draw some Green Lantern. And he rang up his editor, Jack C. Harris, and said, look, there's a guy here who'd really like to draw a Green Lantern cover. And work across the Atlantic Ocean wasn't a very common thing in 1979, which is when this happened. But we did it anyway, and I got my first DC cover of Green Lantern. And because it worked out okay, I did a few more. And they realised at DC that there was a pool of artists in Britain working in 2000 AD who might be well suited to work in DC Comics. So Dick Giordano and one or two other people, Karen Berger, came to this country scouting for other artists and found, I think Dave Gibbons was one of them, and Kevin O'Neill, Mike McMahon a little bit. So it really started with us, a few of us, and then some writers, Garth Ennis, Jamie Delgado, Alan Moore went over there. And so I, in a way, thought it started with me, but Dave Gibbons had actually done the story for Marvel, I think, previously. Also, Barry Windsor Smith had been drawing Conan, although Barry had moved from Britain to America. But really, that was how this particular wave of artists and writers started, and what became known as the British Invasion, I think. Is that thorough enough for you?
Yeah, for sure. That's wonderful. Thank you. And so that is an event that really kind of cemented you as a household name for the average comic book reader. But there are probably
Really?
people watching today who would like to begin making comics for themselves. I'm wondering, what piece of advice would you give to them to get them started down that road to success?
Well, I always duck that question because I started, again, my arithmetic was in 75. So that's, how many years ago was that? When it was a completely different environment, there was just 2000 AD just happened to start when I was starting. So that particular bit of serendipity worked for me. What it's like for new people today is quite a different environment altogether, and I really don't know I can't really imagine what it would be like to be a late teens or early 20s budding comic artist trying to get into it today. I wouldn't even know how you would go about it. I know how I get work, and I think I get work because people have heard of me. So it's a tricky thing really. I would imagine you'd be working on the internet somehow. I think you'd have to be showing your work digitally, wouldn't you, to begin with? But your guess is as good as mine. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Yeah, it's very different with the internet now, for sure. Um,
Oh yeah.
so, as you touched upon there, you were there from the very beginning of 2000 AD. In retrospect, what has that experience been like as somebody who's worked on 2000 AD for so long, watching it grow from those first days into what it is today?
Well, it's astonishing that it kept going so long. I mean, I think it must be Britain's longest running adventure, or the funny, because I don't know, the 30s or the 40s. Eagle was in the 50s, was a very popular thing, but that didn't last very far into the 60s. 2000 AD has gone from 1977 to today, and it's showing no sign of letting up. And Judge Dredd really seems to be probably the most successful adventure character in British comics, I would say. And it's great to see characters that really I co-created along with John Wagner, people like Judge Death and the Four Dark Judges and Anderson and Hershey and some of the others, that I was there at the beginning of those characters. I mean, there are other great characters that Mike McMahon and the other artists originated, but it is great to see it continue.
Wonderful, thank you. So the Killing Joke has gone on to become a cultural juggernaut as far as comics are concerned. At the time, when you're hired to work with Alan Moore, is it something that crosses your mind that it's going to take on the life it has today?
Well, I have to say something to begin with. After I finished Camelot 3000, I got onto DC and I said, look, what do you want me to do next? And Dick Jordan, I said, you can do anything you want, Brian. What would you like to do? And I said, I'd like to draw a Batman comic and I'd like Alan Moore to write it. So really, I wasn't hired to do The Killing Joke. I put it forward to DC and I asked if Alan, because I'd known Alan for some time prior to that, and there was always a feeling that we might do something together. I've forgotten exactly what your question was, but it's great that it has continued to be in print since 1986 in various forms, all sorts of different forms, sort of deluxe editions and absolute editions. And I do get royalties from it, so it enables me to make a living. So I'm very pleased it's continued.
That's fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much for that trivia there. That's so amazing to hear how that process began with that book.
I mean, I'll just add something. I was reading an article in The Guardian the other day, and it was entitled Alan Moore's Controversial Batman Comic. And it was all about how there is a meme in comics that women are often mistreated for the entertainment of the comic book reading public. And The Killing Joke is an example of that. And Gail Simone, who's I'm not sure whether she's a writer or an artist, wrote a strong criticism of this particular trend and how it really ought to be dealt with, rectified really. But throughout the entire article in The Guardian, the name of the artist on The Killing Joke, which is, they were talking about The Killing Joke, was never mentioned. It was Alan Moore's Batman comic, which I did write about it on Facebook. And anyway, carry on.
Wonderful, thank you. I do lots of comic book cons, but I've only done them really since 2015, and I wasn't around at the start of. Sorry, say that again. Yeah. Oh yeah, I was just going to say. Conventions. Yeah.
Conventions. Yeah.
I wasn't around when they first started, but I hear they were greatly different to the mega events that they are today, with a big focus on media guests. What do you prefer? Do you prefer what they are today or what they were in the beginning there?
Well, both were fun. I mean, to begin with, I went to them because all the greats in the comics world were still alive, and it was fantastic to meet people like Frank Bellamy and Frank Hampson, who drew Dan Dare. I met Keith Watson, so it was good. Elder statesmen, they're all men really, in the field. Later on, it was always good to just get together with fellow fans like me. But also, I was a collector. I was a great collector of DC Comics. I spent a load of money buying back issues and I ended up with complete runs of a lot of DC Comics. So we had things called comic marts, where we would just go buy small comics and go and have a beer together. Really, I gave up conventions probably during the 80s, I suppose. And it was after returning to conventions that they had become massive. I have been to probably 3 of the San Diego comic conventions, and the last 2 of those, it was just madness. You know, it would take you 20 minutes to cross the room because you couldn't push your way through the people to get to a panel or something. So they were quite different. I would love to meet I mean, I would have loved to have met the cast of Game of Thrones, for instance. I was a big fan of that. But they are they're quite different now from the small beginnings to these.
Awesome. So we'll open it up to viewer questions, and we do have a few already. So I will go through those with you. So Nate Bennett asks, which comic?
Could you tell us where?
Sorry.
Go on.
Oh, I was going to say Nate Bennett.
Could you tell us?
Sorry, what's it?
Go on.
Nate Bennett asks, which comic did you enjoy drawing the most?
Oh, well, I enjoyed Judge Dredd. I particularly enjoyed the four Dark Judges episodes of Judge Dredd, because I was still working in ink, and it's always a struggle with the tools of the trade. You know, you struggle with the consistency of the ink and the how well the brush is behaving, and it was behaving very well for me at that time. So I was enjoying that, and I also think Judge Dredd is a terrific character. But now I'm doing covers. I love the way 1 minute I can be drawing Wonder Woman, and the next week I can be drawing. Well, actually, I've just drawn the Steel Claw, who was a character from Valiant, which was a British comic that I was reading as a kid. So I love. I think if I were working on a continued strip, the same characters for months, maybe years, and I do love now going from one character to a completely different character. So I really do like that, actually, the variety.
Wonderful, thank you. And Olivia Roberts asks, which comic of yours was the most challenging?
The most challenging? Well, when I started out, Dave Gibbons and I were drawing Power Man, as I said, for Nigeria, and I don't remember what the page count was at the time, but it was a monthly gig. The issues came out bi-weekly, and so each of us had to turn out a story in a month, and I'm quite slow, so towards the end of that month I just wouldn't sleep. I would just carry on working day and night and day, just to get the thing finished. So you might say that was a challenge, a hell of a challenge, but it did teach me, you know, to some extent, that you really do have to hit deadlines and how to draw economically and clearly. So that was a challenge.
Awesome, thank you. And Allard-Will asks, she says, that she loves your Doom Patrol covers. And then she goes on to ask,
oh, thanks.
Have you watched the Doom Patrol TV show or any of the superhero shows or movies? And if so, which ones were your favourites?
I'm not a big fan of watching. I watch all the Batman ones. The Joker I watched, of course. I'm not sure I really thought of it. But I have watched the Doom Patrol. It took a little while because it was not shown in this country for a long time. I think I had to subscribe to Amazon, or was it Amazon or one of the others? And it's absolutely bonkers. I mean, I loved Grant Morrison and Richard Case's Doom Patrol. They're strange characters, and to see them manifested on the television screen. To begin with, I thought, I'm not sure I can be bothered with this, but I pressed on to the end, and it's one of the weirdest bits of television I've ever. It's almost up there with David Lynch in its strangeness. But I'm looking forward to seeing the next season, see how that pans out.
Wonderful, thank you.
Can I just ask one? Can I ask you one thing?
Yeah.
Is there any way I can know where your questioners are coming from, where they live?
So they're all.
Do they tell you?
So I can't really see that, but these are all friends of mine. So I can tell you that Allard-Will is from Saskatoon. Olivia Roberts is from BC, British Columbia.
Oh yeah.
Nate, I believe, is also Nate Bennett, who asked the about the comic that you enjoyed drawing the most is also from BC.
Oh yeah.
And I've got one final question as well from Audra Bellion, who is from here in
All right.
Saskatoon with us as well. She asks,
Yeah.
how do you feel about selling prints of your digital drawings?
Well, the last few times I was at conventions, I was selling prints of my work, which is all digital. But I don't do anything by mail order. I'm really not set up to parcel stuff off and receive money, via PayPal or any of that sort of thing. I'd need a team to do that for me. So I would be doing that at conventions. I'd have a few piles of prints, which I would sign for people and sell for about $20 or something like that. So that's all I have done, but I don't really have the facilities to do it through the mail.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for this, Brian. I've really appreciated it. It's been a wonderful experience, and yeah, it's just been fantastic. And thank you for joining me, and thank you to everyone who joined us and asked all those wonderful questions there. And we will be back soon with another interview.
Thank you.
Like, share, subscribe.